new dentures. And I never could whistle before, but now I whistle with every word. And so please forget about it and just grin. This meeting was called to bring factual information, not rumors, to residents and taxpayers in the town of Ellenburg concerning the proposed wind farm project. In May, the town board appointed 4 committees to do further research and evaluation of this new to us technology. Residents responded to an ad that we had in the paper, in the legal ad, and a short notice in the of interest, and that came out in April. And from this list, they were assigned to committee. And there were 4 committees established. The Benefits Committee, referring to a pilot program or whatever we might decide. The Zoning and Regulations Committee. The Ordinance Committee. And the Public Relations Committee. The Public Relations Committee is composed of Barbara Kramer, Darryl Moore, Sam Maniscallis, Christine Trombley, and myself. The other committees each have a board member as their chairman, and they will be coming to you through another public meeting to update you on what their committees are, how they're progressing. The goals of the Public Relations Committee are to, 1, to inform the public, both full-time and part-time residents of the town of Ellenburg, with the correct and truthful information in relation to the current projected windmill farm. 2, to provide a responsible unit to collect and disperse information, contact speakers, provide films, handouts, and so forth, and to schedule public meetings. The 3rd is to act as the chair at these public meetings and to follow rules and regulations set down in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order. The 4th is to be responsible for notifying the press, the radio, the TV, local groups, getting out posters so that all of you will show up again. And the 5th is probably our most important one, and that's to be both pro and con on this project. John Quirk and Patrick Doyle are here. John represents Noble Energy and Pat the Zopal Energy, and they've been invited this evening so that each may give us an update of any of their environmental studies, possible location of towers, stages of construction of a windmill farm, approximate number of local people to be employed in Ellenburg while this is progressing, and in what capacities. Now, that's just a few of the things that I'm sure they're going to cover. There will be many more. After their presentation, there will be a question and answer period, and I ask that you direct your questions to either Mr. Quirk or Mr. Doyle. And with that, do we flip a coin to see which would
I
like
think we
to...
have a gentleman's agreement. I spoke first the
All
last
right.
time, so...
So it's Pat this time, and Pat, you might introduce the people that are with you.
Sure. Thank you, Councilman Downcutten. Thank you to the committee and for inviting us to speak, and thank you all for taking your time to hear what we have to say. We see wind energy as an exciting development. We see that it has many benefits, and so we certainly appreciate you folks coming to hear what we have to say. I'm sure you have many questions and concerns, and we'll try to answer them. My name is Patrick Doyle. I'm the Director of Development for Zilpa Renewable Energy in the Northeast. I'm here with my colleague Charlie Charlinsky, who's who's joining me. What I'd like to do first is introduce Zilka. We're a company of about 60 people. We've been in the wind business for just about 7 years. Our headquarters is in Houston, Texas. We have 3 offices in New York. We have about 8 people working in the state. And we also work in the upper Midwest, in the Great Plains, in the Northwest, and in California. So we're a nationwide developer focused on the US. We also have a project in Costa Rica, but we're focused on the US. Recently, Zilka was bought by Goldman Sachs, which is a New York investment bank that also has a significant energy trading arm and owns about 6,000 megawatts of power generation on the East Coast. One of the projects which Goldman owns is a 10 megawatt wind farm in Madison County, New York. So we can now say that we have an operating wind farm in New York, which we didn't have before. We're also constructing the Maple Ridge, formerly called Flat Rock Wind Farm in Lewis County, New York. This year we're building 120 turbines. We started construction in May, and we expect to complete the first phase of that project by the end of this year. So that's Zilka. As many of you will notice, I have an Irish accent, so I come from South East Ireland. The county I come from, County Wexford, now has 3 wind farms, 1 offshore and 2 onshore. And one of the wind farms is on the site, a site that was originally proposed for a nuclear plant. And I'm certainly very pleased to see a wind farm instead of a nuclear plant at that site. So I was brought up on a farm, and when you're brought up on a farm, sometimes it's hard to make a living. I'm one of 9 children, and the farm that we were brought up on really certainly couldn't support 9 of us, and couldn't even support 1 of us. One of the appealing things about wind energy is wind turbines can provide more income for landowners and maybe make the difference between supporting a body on that farm and not supporting a body. So that's, if people ask me what's a key driver for me, it's the idea that you can, a landowner can make that little bit more from his investment, and from his investment in his resources and his investment in his time. I also have, my wife has asthma, and 2 of my children also have breathing difficulties. So I'm quite concerned about the quality of the air we breathe. And I've seen my wife have asthma attacks. Half of asthma attacks come from pollution, power plant pollution and vehicle emissions, and half of asthma doesn't. I don't know where her asthma comes from, but it's a pretty frightening thing when you see someone not being able to breathe. Ultimately, if you can't breathe, you can't live. So being able to work the land, being able to breathe, here are 2 areas that for me are extremely important. It's also nice to work in wind energy. You're working in rural areas, working in the fresh air, meeting folks like yourselves. So it's a very, very interesting job to have. So let me tell you maybe a little bit more about why we're here. New York is the Empire State, and at the beginning of the last century, New York built a couple of huge hydro projects that produced cheap, long-lasting hydropower, clean, renewable energy. And that hydropower produced a significant amount of New York's electricity and allowed New York to grow to be the Empire State, a strong and wealthy state. The problem with hydropower is the potential is limited. You tap the hydropower and there's not much more else you can tap. You can pick a little bit up here and there, but hydropower is almost the first source of electricity, and once you tap it, you have to find other sources. And New York had a very significant amount of its electricity from hydro. But as the economy grew, hydro resources stayed constant. So there was more coal, more oil, and most recently gas. And in the US in the last 10 years, about 90% of the new electricity generating plants have come from gas. We all use electricity, and we all use more electricity every year. Every year, this country uses 1.5 to 2.5% more electricity. And that electricity has to come from somewhere. Having it come from nuclear is not going to happen in the next 10 years. Having it come from coal is not going to happen in this state. And so the answer was gas, and most of the new projects were gas. The problem is, at the beginning of those 10 years, gas cost $2 a million BTU, and now it costs $6 to $7 a million BTU. So I think it's very difficult for all of us to find something which is very important to us, electricity and heat, costing. It's very, very hard for us to imagine that something so basic is going to cost us 3 times now what it cost 10 years ago. And so there are, of course, I mentioned the emissions impacts of fossil fuel. And so Governor Pataki in January 2003 in his State of the State address said that he would like to see 25% of New York's electricity come from renewable resources, which is where it had been some 20 or 30 years ago. There was a public process which took 1.5 years and was participated in by 150 different entities representing consumer groups, unions, environmental groups, business, farmers, developers, competing generators. Everybody participated in this process. And in September of 2004, the New York Public Service Commission made an order stating that 25% of New York's electricity should come from renewable resources by the year 2013. Wind is, renewable resources are hydro, wind, solar, biomass, biogas, and also landfill gas. But wind is a very, for a renewable resource, it's a very economical form, and it's also a very clean form. It's also something that is in abundant supply in New York State. You all know that it's very windy here. And there are probably about 100 sites in New York that have wind and transmission, which are the important criteria. That doesn't mean to say that there are 100 sites you can develop, but there are 100 potential economical sites. If you go on the website, www.truewind.com, there's a wind map which was contracted for by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and that will show you where the windy areas are. And this is a very windy area, and that's why we're here, and that's why other developers are interested in this area. Well, where exactly is windy according to the wind map? This area from the Canadian border coming down Route 189, basically extending over to the Clinton-Franklin border. This is, the yellow shows hay, the pasture and hay, open farmland. Where you have open farmland, you've generally got farmers working the land, and you also have few trees, and so the wind can sweep across the land. So this is basically the windy area in this, according to the computer simulations, this is where it's windiest. And with wind energy, the speed of the wind, the energy you get out from wind is proportional to the cube of the wind speed. So let's say the wind speed is 2, the energy output will be 2 by 2 by 2, will be 8. Well, let's say on some higher ground down the street the wind speed is 3, then the energy output will be 3 by 3 by 3, which is 27. So if the wind speed is 50% faster, the energy output will be 3 times as much. And so in order to maximize the amount of energy you get from the wind, you need to go, it's very important to select the windiest area in order to have an economical project. So, of course, there are many windy areas, but in order to take that wind and send it where it needs to go, you need a transmission line, you need a road, you need a pathway. And so this area has, right on the border of the towns of Clinton and Ellenburg, there is a transmission line which has capacity for, actually two transmission lines which, as they're currently configured, have maximum capacity for just over 300 megawatts. Of course, these transmission lines, it's not like they're sitting there empty. They already have some power going back and forth on them. Oh, I'm sorry. These transmission lines have about 300 megawatts of capacity on them. Of course, that capacity is already being used. But in any case, there are wind energy. In order to develop a wind project, you need wind. You need a way to deliver the product from where it's produced to where it's consumed, so you need a transmission line. And the third thing you need is you need a receptive community. So we pretty much know we have wind. You've seen a number of measuring towers. I think there are probably, I don't know, six or seven in these two towns. So wind measurements have been taken for the past 3 years, and a number of computer simulations have been done. So we know it's windy. You know it's windy. We know it's windy. We've now proven it. There's a transmission line. We know the transmission line has capacity. So the question now is, do we have a receptive community? And for sure, the landowners in this area have been receptive. And the towns in this area have been receptive. They have invited us to present our idea, and they've invited you to hear it and question and comment. So we're going through a process here which might end up with wind turbines in your town, and might not end up in wind turbines in your town. Really, yes has been answered to 2 of the 3 questions, and the remaining question is, for the towns of Clinton and Ellenburg, are the benefits, do we believe that the benefits of wind energy are sufficient to merit any impact which we see? So just to go through the process, to talk about, and I'm going to cover some stuff that my colleague John Quirk would also cover, so I'll probably cover more than he does, but we go through the same process. To develop a wind farm, we need to find a windy area, then we need to draw some kind of boundary, we need to see who owns the land, and then we need to see if there's transmission capacity, and we need to contact the landowners to see if they're interested. And then we need to do some preliminary studies to see if our initial thoughts are correct. And we're basically at that point. And then the next step is to introduce ourselves to the community and basically to get more deeply into the process. You folks have many questions. We have some answers. There are other things we don't have the answers for because we haven't done the studies. And so we can answer some of your questions now, but we're at that process where we need to get into some depth in the studies. Some of the concerns that you folks have are, well, what about the roads? If we develop a wind project here, we would have a road agreement with the town and the county. We'd have an agreement which says we would propose what roads we'd like to use to deliver the turbines and the concrete and the gravel. And the towns and the county would look at that and they'd say, okay, but, and we might say we need to widen roads and we need to improve them, and they would say, well, if you want to do that, you have to pay for it, and the landowners on either side have to be agreeable, and you have to repair any damage, and you have to put up a bond to cover the damage in case you don't pay. So we wouldn't build a project here without having an agreement with the town and the county. But you might also say as well, yeah, this wind energy is clean, renewable energy, that seems like a good thing, and lots of people will benefit. Not just us, but lots of people, but we'll have it in our town. What do we get out of it? And so there is a law in New York which exempts renewable energy projects from local taxes, but that exemption can be withdrawn by any of the taxing authorities. So the towns, the county and the school would like to get something out of it, and we would like to contribute something. And so that would, I think, for the towns and the county and the school, there would have to be an agreement between the developer and the taxing authorities as to what is a reasonable amount to pay every year to the community. And that's basically a subject for discussion. There's kind of been a standard set by other projects, and one thing I'll say is there are about 45 wind projects in New York applying to be interconnected to the New York Independent System Operator. 45 projects representing about 5,500 megawatts. I think it's probably fair to say that the market for wind energy in New York is probably about 3,000 megawatts, and that we know the transmission grid can accommodate 3,000 megawatts with only minor adjustments. So we know that the grid can accommodate 3,000 megawatts. We know there's a market for about 3,000 megawatts, but people like us have applied to interconnect 6,000. If you look at this area, people like us have applied to connect almost 600 megawatts, but the line can only accommodate about 300. So it's probably a good thing for folks, because competition means if you're selling something and you have a lot of competition to sell it to, you can probably get higher prices. And if we're selling something and there are other people trying to sell the same thing, our prices have to come down. So I think the process that the state has set up appears to be working extremely well. You have a lot of competition to deliver green energy, which you would think would bring the prices down. But all our competitors are making presentations like this, and so for us to be successful, we have to have a viable business. It has to be viable for us, it has to be viable for you. You don't want us putting up a project which is not viable. If you want a project, you want it to be viable, and you want it to pay its taxes, you want it to pay its landowners, and you want to pay its employees, and you want it to be successful. So we do have competition, and everybody else has competition, and so we need to come to, in order to build a project, we need to come to an appropriate agreement with the towns for some kind of payment in lieu of taxes. The other process that any project of any size in New York has to go through is the State Environmental Quality Review Act, the SEQR process. And I would say that probably that's where we're getting to here. That process involves people like us saying we'd like to do something, and coming to the towns and saying we'd like to do it, and probably filling out a fairly short environmental assessment form, probably comprised of the town saying, well, this is a very significant project you're proposing, and we think it could have impacts on the town, and so we'd like to study, we need to know more about this project. And as there would be a number of agencies involved, there would be the town, the county, the Department of Public Service, the DEC, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, the FAA, numerous agencies would be involved. Those agencies would get together and say, you know, one of us should take the lead here. We should have a lead agency. So we'd have a lead agency, and the lead agency would probably say, well, what do we need studied here? These things are tall, so we'd like a visual assessment. We've heard these things might be noisy, so we'd like a noise assessment. These things are tall, so they might interfere with microwave paths. We want that studied. I've heard they interfere with birds and bats. We'd like to know what the impact is. We don't want the Army Corps and the DEC are concerned about wetlands. The transmission operator is concerned about the capacity of his line, the reliability of his line, and the reliability of the grid. So numerous things need to be studied, and there are a couple of forums to study them. The transmission reliability is studied by the New York Independent System Operator and the local transmission owner. But locally, we need to go through an State Environmental Quality Review Act. Whoever the lead agency is, in my opinion, should have a scoping session, invite the public and say, what would we like studied? What would we like studied in the environmental impact statement? Noise, visual, road impacts, transportation, microwave. And as there has been some history of wind development, not just in New York, but also across the nation, there's a fairly good standard now of what needs to be studied. But the lead agency should go through that process and define the scope to be studied. And then the developer who would like to build a project needs to go away and study the wetland impacts and the road impacts. For the Flat Rock project, we did a draft environmental impact statement, and it was about 5 volumes. And so we looked at all those items, and we posted this draft environmental impact statement, which took probably numerous months, if not a year. It takes months and months and months to prepare this. And some of the stuff we've already done. It's a very extensive study. We would present this to the lead agency, and the lead agency would review it, decide if it was complete or not. If it wasn't complete, we would complete it, and then there would be a public process to this. Such a document would be available to the public, and there would be a public process. Comments would be taken and findings made, and any permit issued or any building permits or whatever issued would be subject to those findings. So this all sounds. It sounds like a lot to do. I hope that's not my phone.
No.
It's saying 5 minutes more.
Okay. Sounds like a lot to do, but it's an important process because it protects the natural resources, it protects the town, and it also protects us because we all agree what we would like studied, and we go ahead and do it. Of course, this work is done at our cost, and there's also some review required by the towns, some legal review, and some consultants would be required to review this. Typically, developers would pay for the town's consultants. There's no reason why the town should pay for a project that we want to develop. And so another agreement we would have at a very early stage is an agreement to pay for the town's legal and environmental advice. So we have Zilka. We have spent some time with some of you. We've taken some folks on a tour of the 2 existing wind farms in the eastern half of New York and Madison County. And we'd like to repeat that exercise. We'd like to take folks on another tour so people can see what these wind farms look like and talk to the folks at those wind farms. Of course, people are always welcome to go themselves and to make their own investigation. So anyway, we have made an application to build 75 turbines included in Ellenburg. And so we've applied to the grid to interconnect up to 123 megawatts or 75 turbines. They will not give us permission to, that's what we applied for, they will not give us permission to interconnect more, but we could interconnect less if that's what comes about as a result of their studies or our studies. So that's the project that we're proposing. It will generally be in this area, and as we go through the process, we will be in a position to provide more detailed information on where the turbines will be and where the roads will be and so on and so forth. So I think I've hit my time limit. I'll hand it over to Mr. Quirk, and I guess there'll be a question and answer series later.
Thank you. John?
Thank you. Okay, I suppose I should begin by saying that I pretty much agree with everything that Patrick said. And he said some stuff that I would have said, perhaps not as eloquently, but all the stuff about societal advantages, the benefits of wind turbines, all of that is exactly as I would have presented myself. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip some of this. We've brought a little handout, and I think there are enough copies for some of you in the room. You're going to have to go and make some copies if everybody's going to have one, but we have enough. I think that people will be able to cover what I'm going to say now quite quickly, and take the information home and ruminate on it. This also contains, if you like, some metrics, some actual values. So it would be nice for some of you to have those actual handouts. Okay, my name is John Quirk. I'm the principal of Noble Environmental Power, and I brought some folks here this evening. Mark Lyons, who is the manager here regionally in the northeast of New York. Sandy Sayon, who's the manager of our environmental effort. Patrick McCarthy, who is a wetlands guy. He works for an environmental consultant for us and is presently doing a wetlands delineation. And David Schwartz, who is he does, I guess, birds, wetlands, bats, a lot. He's also working on this project, on a project in Clinton. So during the Q&A, if you have specific questions, we're going to try and direct those questions at the person who's on this table will answer them. There was a clash this evening. We have a meeting in Clinton tonight as well, and our construction head, Fred Sayo, is there. Unfortunately, ordinarily he would come to this meeting. And Chip Redling, some of you know, who does a lot of the land work and works along the landowners here, would ordinarily be here. And these guys are always available to you. All the people I've spoken about are based in the office in Malone and are ordinarily contactable during the day if anyone has any questions. And the office is an open house. Anyone who wants to come in there and ask a question, if we don't have the answer right there because someone's in the field, our commitment to you is to get those questions answered. Okay, Noble. Noble is a JP Morgan company in the same way as Ilka is owned by Goldman Sachs. Noble, which was founded 5 or 6 years ago, was bought by JP Morgan early last year, and is really, from Noble, you can say JP Morgan Wind Development Company. They own the vast majority of the stock in the business. It's a JP Morgan effort. JP Morgan is a New York-based bank, has a private equity arm, and the private equity arm of JPM is funding the entire effort here in Ellenburg and in Clinton and elsewhere. Okay, we have a number of efforts going on locally. Ellenburg and Clinton and to the east of here in Altona. I'm going to talk about the Ellenburg project, exclusive of the park this evening. The project that we would do, as quickly as we can cover, with not the work necessary to do it. And again, I'm working from the handout, so I hope that people who are into will actually look at this. The project area that we envisage is about 2,100 acres, and there are 29 landowners involved in that, and we would hope the number of turbines will be somewhere between 45 and 55 turbines, a maximum project size of about 79.5 megawatts. Okay, there is a little map in the handout. The southern boundary of the project is the northern boundary down around that park. The northern boundary is the number 5 county road. The western boundary is the county border, and the eastern boundary is moving over towards the Brandybrook Road. Okay, so what are we doing here? We have been here since we're here almost a year now. And in that time we have commenced a full-blown development effort here in Ellenburg. We came here with, as Patrick has said, knowledge of an existing wind resource. We had done some work with simulations and modelling, and we had a degree of accuracy which we're now verifying by the presence of some wind measuring equipment which we have seen around the place. There are 3 towers in this area that we're using to monitor the wind resource in the area. We, as a lot of you know, we have a property rights program which is in the final stages here. 29 landowners. We're working with a couple of other landowners, but our footprint is pretty well defined for what we want to do in Ellenburg. And as Patrick has pointed out, we are constrained by the amount of power that can be injected into the system. Like Jilka, our application is based on real projects as opposed to notional projects. Okay, environmentally, our environmental effort began here in the early spring, and we have been doing a number of things. We have been delineating wetland. For those of you that have seen a wetland map, there's someone over there actually earlier on. The state and federal folks, think they have a wetland delineation map, but the only way to do this properly really is to walk the land and to figure out what is wetland and what is not, and go with aerial photography and records of walkthroughs, the actual sites, and agree what indeed is wetland and has to be excluded from the project. Wetlands questions can be directed at Pat here. He'll answer any questions you have. That effort, if you see people walking around on Ellenburg land that's in the NOBLE programme, that's one of the things we're doing. We've also have a programme well underway to monitor bird activity in the area, both habitat, migration patterns, an entire scope of what is necessary in order to prepare an environmental permit application and to comply with SECRA, the State Environmental Quality Review Act. We can answer some questions on that. The effort is ongoing and will continue through the spring of next year. We've also spoken with the DEC to try and establish a methodology for dealing with issues surrounding bats. Bats are quite a hot issue with the environmentalists at the moment, and we're doing 2 things in this area. We have a mobile bat radar van which actually stays at one location and measures bat activity. It's done for the spring and it will do it in the fall. And we have an anabat monitoring system going here to try and create a database for the DEC of what dangers to bats are represented by the presence of windmills. Also environmentally, I have to make a quick reference to a post-construction study that we're doing on an existing wind farm, because a lot of the questions you get about bird and bat has to do with what will happen. And of course, nobody can predict what will happen when the wind turbine plant is built. We can make educated guesses. But one way we can help that process is to actually try and get some real data from a wind farm, and an agreement with a wind company elsewhere in the state, to actually monitor and count bird carcasses. And to do that morning and evening, and to do it like on a regular basis over a very long period of time, and actually get some hard data. The DEC is also obviously very interested in this, and they're encouraging us to do it. It's an expense, but I want to be able to give full rounded answers to these questions concerning the danger that these machines represent for birds. Once all of this is done, in addition to preparing the actual permit process, you also have knowledge of where you can physically locate these turbines. You will have excluded all kinds of things. You will have excluded wetland, you will have excluded areas surrounding residences, you will have excluded roads, schools, whatever it is that you are required to stay back from by whatever distance. And what you're left with is a portion of the footprint of the land in which you want to put the project, and you have to site the turbines on that. And the siting of the turbines is dark science. It's to do with computer programs and wind simulation studies. That really cannot be done until all this other work is done to a level of satisfaction that we know is going to be acceptable to a reasonable person looking at an environmental report. So the micrositing process for Ellenburg is some months away. It will be, I would hope, coincident with the time that the moratorium is reconsidered here. that at that time, you know, maybe to help with that process, we'd be able to give you a snapshot of you know, physically where these turbines would be located. The next thing we would do, and all of that is done, is we would prepare a full application. Again, I'm kind of mouthing what Patrick has been saying, but it would be like this type of stuff, and it would contain visual information, sound information, all of the environmental information, all of the technical information in one consolidated application, and it would be presented to the permitting authority for their consideration. The other matter that we had to get through is we had to negotiate various agreements with the town, you know, for roads, for pilot, and so on. And those agreements, you know, I fully endorse what Patrick has said. Those agreements need to be very clearly understood by everybody, and you know, need to represent, you know, no risk and as much benefit as we possibly can to accrue to the people who are living in the area. Okay, I actually covered quite a bit of that, didn't I? We also, of course, work with the New York State Agriculture and Markets. I think we have a representative here, do we?
Actually, no, I'm working here at Farm Bureau, which is.
Farm Bureau, sorry.
But he knows Matt Brown,
Yeah. Matt Brower is the guy we deal with, and you know, we work very closely because clearly, you know, an additional consideration in a community like Ellenburg is that we minimise the impact to the activity of farming, both during the construction, which is 5 months of you know, pretty intense activity in the area, and then post-construction in the way we maintain roads and the way we work with the farming community to ensure that you know, their expectations are met or exceeded. Okay, I have a couple of slides in here that really are metrics. They kind of describe, like, in real terms, what a wind farm in Ellenburg would displace in terms of you know, poisons in the atmosphere. And I'll read them off to you. You know, NOx, nitrous oxides, the various compounds of nitrogen and oxygen, 180 tons annually. Sulfur dioxide, which is the cause of acid rain, 384 tons. Carbon dioxide, which is the product of any combustion and which is the cause of the greenhouse gas effect, 110,000 tons. And particulate matter, 64 tons. And that's every single year. Now, the figures are based on a blend of gas and coal. Gas clearly is less polluting than coal. If it displaces only coal, which is a possibility, the figure for carbon dioxide would be 260,000 tons. So we're not talking about insignificant amounts of improvement in the environment here. We're talking about huge, huge changes in the air we breathe. Okay, economic benefits. It just increases the property tax base for Ellenburg. And it increases it based on, and I hope Patrick will forgive me, based on the agreement that was made on another project in New York quite recently. The total tax that will be paid is $477,000 a year, which will be divided between the county, the school district, and the town of Ellenburg. And under the current split, as I understand it, that would mean $162,450 of direct payment to the town of Ellenburg. Now the other stuff would go to the county and the school district, and somehow it would affect, you know, the amount of tax that you guys would actually pay. It will have a beneficial effect on your tax in the school district and with the county. As far as the town is concerned, the town would have to decide, you know, what it would do with this increased tax. It's the equivalent of 102 new $100,000 properties, homes, where people will find out they pay property tax based on $100,000 home. And if they all were paying their tax, and there were 102 of them, the town would receive exactly the same as they would from the schools. Jobs. The construction job estimate, which is based on a project that we have in construction in the state of Michigan. It doesn't vary that dramatically. Once you get to about 55 or 60 megawatts, all the way up to, you know, beside the project that has been done on Maple Ridge, it's somewhere in the 250s people who would be directly employed in the construction of the project. But construction projects, as you know, they're transient. It's a kind of a 5 or 6 month process. The number of jobs that are generated for a project in its operational phase, and it's hot in here, isn't it? The number of jobs that were generated in the operational phase of the project, based on 100 megawatts, because the state has a model to try and figure out the number of job equivalents. And the state employment equivalent model for a 100 megawatt project is 43 jobs. Now, those jobs are not direct jobs, 43 people who get up in the morning and go to work on this particular project. Some of them are those kinds of jobs, others of them are indirect jobs, service suppliers, people who are working on more than one project, increased commercial activity generally in the town of Ellenburg. I think, as we go through our development process, we're building, a plan, an employment plan surrounding the project, and there are a number of direct jobs that I just want to briefly talk about. I want to talk about the operations and maintenance jobs that the project would create. These are high-value electromechanical jobs. They require training, probably by General Electric in Schenectady, and they need to be ultimately jobs that are performed by local people who are invested in this community. And that's not being altruist, it's just an intelligence test to find and develop a local expertise for the wind park that's going to stay here. If we zoom people in, they'll zoom right back out, some other time. So we really try to find valuable, skilled local resources and get them into these positions and these jobs. There are, I don't know how many of these jobs there will be, but there's going to be a good number of them. And then down the food chain from that, there will be good clerical jobs, there will be support jobs, there will be ploughing contracts, there will be all kinds of increased activity in the local shops, electromechanical work, all kinds of support activities. And I hope that in 2 years' time, if we're successful in permitting the project here, I'll be able to come to you and say, okay, here's my understanding of how we get to 43. And on top of that list will be the real jobs and then the indirects. A third benefit, we pay the landowners easement payments, both during the investigation period and a royalty-based payment during the actual operation of the project, which is based on the project's performance. And we do all that while indemnifying and protecting the landowner from the liabilities associated with the project. I think another benefit worth mentioning is that all of this happens, this tax base and the employment, without additional stress on the community. There are no increased demands on your school system, on the sewer, on the roads or anything else. We don't import a lot of people who are going to live here for a long time and whose children will need to be educated and who will have needs of the fire service and so on. So it's kind of, I have to say, for the school district, it's sort of, you can consider it a windfall. I've got to be careful, I'm not a teacher on the board here, but it is a sort of windfall. How am I doing? Okay. I want to talk briefly about some myths that you will all have heard about wind energy. And again, I put 3 or 4 of them into this slide. And I'd ask people to do their own investigation of these myths. But the things we've heard really quite disturbing. That wind turbines cause mad cow disease, or can cause mad cow disease. It's just a bizarre idea. I can't get up here and tell you, make an argument, because it's just so bizarre that it beggars belief. I really don't know what I can say. Wind turbines cause low-frequency noise problems. There's no basis for this, and in fact, the source that was quoted by the person who suggested this is quite annoyed that he was quoted and has written a paper which we'd be happy to share with you, saying there are no significant low-frequency or infrasound emissions from a modern windmill. People who have those kinds of concerns because they've heard this, we have information from independent sources. There's no point in me writing a paper and saying, here, this is the truth of it, but from independent, acknowledged experts. And we're happy to share any of that with you, like people who have those kinds of concerns. Another one was wind turbines rumble the ground, they shake the ground in the deep geology of the ground. Well, I think the best thing to do, and some of you have done this, anyone who came to Fenner with me to the Fenner Wind Park, I asked them to put their forehead against the support structure of the windmill and see if they could feel anything at all of the windmill that's above, spinning away. And without exception, they've said, nothing. So if you can't feel it in the tower, I want someone to explain the physics to me of how you can feel it in the deep geology of the ground or anywhere else. Wind turbines cause stray voltage. Now, stray voltage is a concern for farmers because many farmers over the course of building and developing a farm have experienced stray voltage problems, and when you talk to farmers about it like Dave, it's a real concern. It's not caused by windows. What it's caused by are incorrect wiring practices and the use of multiple grounds or earths in constructing an electrical system in a building or in a building that's being extended. These problems have materialized more in certain places than in others because the codes vary from state to state. I mean, the state of Wisconsin where they've had these kinds of problems. If you read the electrical code, an electrical engineer will tell you why this has occurred. And where stray voltage problems have occurred that I talk to farmers about, inevitably there has been more than one grounding source in the electrical distribution that was under consideration. Happy to share all this electrical, grounding, stray voltage kind of information with anyone who has an interest. Okay, a nice picture of our Batmobile. We're very proud of this. There was a scramble to get these things under contract at the end of last year. And this machine produces fascinating information. It measures radars in the sky in this direction and in this direction. And it does it continuously, and it does it from a single location, and it does it in the spring, and it does it in the fall. And it has records of anything that crosses the barrier. And then these guys, they look at it, they do visual confirmations of the breeding and so on, and you produce a real picture of what is happening with aerial creatures in the area. Okay, a schedule for Ellenburg. I apologise for the typo here, and it's a real beauty. It says complete environmental studies May 1st, 2005. Of course, should be May 1st, 2006, because Patrick again correct, it takes a year or thereabouts to get this stuff done. So it will be the spring of next year before we have an entire environmental package together here. As far as a timeline for the project itself is concerned, again, in deference to the moratorium, I have like day one and then counting the days from there. If we had a complete application filed on day one with the town or the lead agency, we would expect that it would take 3.5 months to get the approvals, to negotiate everything that we needed to negotiate, and to agree everything and to have a full understanding of the town of what was going to happen. So we're saying 3.5 months for that. And then a construction effort of some 5 months. So, soup to nuts, it's an 8.5 month deal from the point where we pull our own internal lead and say, okay, we're going to submit an application. I have to say that we're doing all the work that will be required to do that application, regardless of the fact that we're at risk. I think Patrick's doing exactly the same thing. Okay. Finally, there's contact information in here. People who are based in Malone, myself based in Chester, there are phone numbers and there are email addresses. We encourage anybody to call us or contact us. With that, I think Councillor Danforth will leave it there.
Thank you, Pat and John. I have a comment and then I have a question. I was delighted the other day to receive my Business Week and find an article, Alternate Power, Changes in the Wind. And it really goes into detail of the finances, and it's a very reassuring article to read. And I hope that all of you get a chance. The second is my question. The Adirondack Explorer is a North Country magazine by subscription. And there's an article, should the APA approve wind towers in North Creek? And there's a yes and a no. And the following page is the Explorer mailbox with letters to the editor, sort of thing, with way off base, minimal threat to birds, looking good, tourist attraction, less is more, and so forth. But it's, at last, it's all coming out in the open with different publications. And we're becoming more familiar with this. With seeing this in the Adirondack Explorer, do either of you have any feeling about the possibility that the park will be opened for wind energy development? The northern part, or?
Maybe I probably know less about the Adirondack Park than anybody in this room. So, I will try to answer that. For wind energy production, you need three things: wind, transmission, and a receptive community. And receptive community, I include people who want it and environmental conditions that can accommodate it. The Adirondack Park is windy. But there are not many transmission lines in the Adirondack Park. There are not many people there. There are not many transmission lines. And one thing about electricity, it's generally consumed where there are people, and you generally need to produce electricity fairly close to where there are people. And some folks say, like for example Tom Golisano, wind energy is good, you should produce it in the Midwest. And of course, wind energy is produced in the Midwest. The problem about producing wind energy in the Midwest and wanting to consume it in New York is that you make Indiana and Ohio and Pennsylvania, you make them transmission corridors, and then you have so many losses that you have nothing left by the time you get back. So consumption and production need to be reasonably close together. So in the park, there are not many transmission lines to, there are not many people to consume it, and there are not many transmission lines to bring the energy elsewhere. So there's a lot of state land in the park, which I'm not saying it probably involves a change in the Constitution of New York. So maybe it's not impossible, but it's close to impossible if the state owns the land. So there are actually very few areas in the Adirondack Park where you have the criteria: wind, receptive community, and transmission. One of those areas is North Creek, and we did a study. We had a consultant look at the possibility, and they concluded North Creek, the very southern part of the park, and the very northern part of the park, the conditions could exist: transmission, wind, and the possibility of a permit. North Creek, there's an existing mine. It has probably the most liberal permitting regime in the whole park. So there are very few areas where you could do it. One place in the north, one place in the south, one place in the middle. For us, in any development, you go for the low-hanging fruit, the windiest area with the most capacity on the transmission line with the most enthusiastic people. So in the park, there are very limited areas, and you have one extra layer of permitting, of approval. And so that was a question you asked: will they approve it? The feedback I have gotten indirectly is that the Adirondack Park many of the resources in the park have been damaged, seriously damaged by pollution coming from Midwest coal plants. And so there is a recognition that the resources in the park have been damaged by fossil fuel power plants. And there is some acknowledgement that fossil fuel power plants, electricity produced by fossil fuel power plants, is not good for the park. So I think that acknowledgement is there. Whether the park agency would permit a project or not, as I say, I know less than any of you. But there are very few areas where the question would arise.
Maybe I can add a little bit to that. You know, we've had the same reaction in the park. You know, that they would consider in certain specific areas, you know, doing or issuing a permit. And you know, in the context of my question, it was the extreme north park. We have a strong sense that they really would like to see this at work. They want to see what the construction does to impact the area, and they want to see what the actual windmills what the behaviour is. I was quite encouraged actually by the couple of conversations that I've had, and as you know, I mean, those of you that are following this know that we have a parcel of contiguous land in the park. The acknowledgement that the park is being damaged from other sources is very clear. There are people committed to the environment who are in the Park Authority, and they know that the static policy of just keeping everything out in the park is not the answer. I also had a very fair comment recently that is it really fair to for no good reason prevent an economic opportunity to the people who are resident in the park in an appropriate park.
I have a question to that subject. May I ask them? Okay, are you guys, did either one of you have representatives at the APA meeting in this spring?
No.
No.
No, okay, because they did discuss the possibility of wind farm projects in the Adirondacks in the APA, and they said they wouldn't even consider it. The other comment is a Time magazine last week also had a good article on it.
Have either of you gotten any information that you're willing to release from the wind towers, the wind measuring towers that you have up now?
Yeah, the wind here is comfortably north of 8 meters per second as an annual average.
So
And
it's,
that's publicly available information. If you go to
Yeah.
the New York website, you can see that a good part of this area has a little red spot.
yeah, but I was wondering about the specific measuring devices that you have in place now.
There's a graph like every day.
Yeah. Is it about what you expected?
Yes it is. Yes it is.
And what's that number?
As I've said, it's north of 8 meters per second.
Pardon me?
It's north, it's in excess of 8 meters per second as an annual average. And then there are monthly averages, and there are diurnal averages, and there are day and night. There's, season by season. It is very, very complex. It's not possible to say the answer to your question is why. It's an intermittent resource, and it blows at a different rate, and you can make assumptions about the averages, in different months and at different times of the day. But it's the annual average is, in excess of 8 meters per second.
What velocity is it you need to run the nacelles?
The
The
wind
highest.
speeds here are acceptable. Like, they're more than acceptable. This is a good wind resource.
What's the peak amount that you would use? What, how much?
Well, a wind turbine can accept wind at lots of different speeds. The design that we're considering, which is a 1.5 megawatt machine, it will begin to generate electricity at wind speeds of about 4 meters per second, little in excess of 4 meters per second,
How's that miles per hour measured?
13 feet per second.
Hmm?
13 feet per second.
Miles per hour?
Miles per hour.
About 8,
God.
about 8.
Yeah.
8
Little
is
bit
an
more than-
average?
little bit
Would
more
that
than-
be a monthly average about?
No,
that?
what I'm saying is that the turbine is standing there and the wind begins to blow. Once it reaches that speed, the turbine is capable of generating electricity.
Right,
And it will ramp up as the wind speed increases to about 15 meters per second, which is 50 feet per second, which is like 40-something miles an hour, is it? Something like that, 36 miles an hour. It ramps up to its maximum speed and the maximum generation capacity, and it's generating the 1.5 megawatts at that wind speed. It then, as the wind speed increases, it continues to generate at 1.5 megawatts until about 25 meters per second, when the wind speeds are sufficiently high that the mill has to turn itself off, it has to feather itself out of the wind. So the graph looks like a ramp up, a horizontal piece, and then a dead stop.
so the top speed that they shut down is miles per hour?
25 meters per second approximately.
I mean, for miles per hour.
They run there.
3 times like 50.
About 50. About 50.
50?
That's when they shut down.
50 feet per second, which is 38 miles an hour. Yeah, something get a calculator.
I've never done feet per second.
Yeah,
It's one of the odd aspects of the wind energy industry. I've worked in the US and for US companies for 25 years, and it's all in feet and inches. This industry is completely metric, even in America. It's extraordinary.
so they only require a certain amount of mile per hour wind speed, and at a certain point, they're gonna shut down because it's too much.
That's correct.
And what'd you say the amount that they need to operate, they start kicking on at, how many miles per hour?
It was a four and a bit, 4.25 meters per second. 35 miles an hour. The shutdown speed is 35. So the cut-in speed is about 8 miles.
It'll be between 8 and 35.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we've covered that one pretty good.
That's maybe metric.
Are there any further questions?
Yeah, one more for both gentlemen.
All right.
I'm an ex-banker, guys. I hear J.P. Morgan, and I hear Goldman Sachs. J.P. Morgan's Chase Bank, am I correct?
That's correct.
Goldman Sachs, Bank of America?
No.
It's not a retail bank, it's an investment.
No, they're not junk bonds, no. Goldman Sachs isn't junk bonds. Both you gentlemen have a great brogue. Pat, you got a better one. My question to both of you is, it appears that, are you guys going to be here 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Is this just an investment and then you're going to be bailing out? Or is it that you're actually in it for the long haul?
But I'll tell you about, my position. It is odd, I suppose, that.
Yes, sir, that's what I'm.
It is odd, and we actually.
It's odd that we were colleagues in General Electric 25 years ago. That's odd as well.
But I'll tell you why that happened. In fact, I alluded to it earlier. We probably all share a similar heritage. Maybe it's happened to me more recently than it's happened to many of your families, but at some point, us or our forefathers were in a situation where the place where we were brought up we were not able to see an opportunity for us to support, to get a job or to support, earn money, support our families. With many Irish people, it happened 150 years ago. And it continued to happen for 150 years until about 1995. Every year, 60,000 people left Ireland. GE, when I graduated, GE hired 6 of us. And in 1982, we came to Schenectady, New York. And we were trained by GE, and then we were sent all around the world. And of course, this is a land of great opportunity. It's a wonderful country. So we came here and we liked it. And there are many people like us who worked for GE and now live here. I married somebody from Illinois. We have 4 children. We've lived in Albany for 6 years. Kids are all in the local school, and this is where we have our lives. And wind energy is a long-term business. When I started working here, there was no market. We were really just a bunch of dreamers believing that this was the right thing to do, but there was nothing there to say that it was the right thing. But in the last year or so, as really high energy prices started to cause problems, people realized not only can we get energy where the cost doesn't go up, we can get energy that we don't have to import. We can, in New York, if we get this 3,000 megawatts of wind, 10% of the electricity in New York is generated from oil. That oil comes from, where it comes from the Middle East. We can consume 10% less oil if we have 3,000 megawatts of wind. we could have less pollution, we could have more vibrant rural communities. And so it's, it provides an opportunity for me to work here and live here. And that's, you know, I like that, I like it here. You all know what it's like if you've got a family, you can never, there are always expenses. So I'm like all of you, I've got to earn a living, and this is a great place to work and live. And I'm not planning on going anywhere.
Just one
Maybe
comment.
I'll add a little bit to that. I'm sorry.
Just one comment on that. I think probably all of us that are grandparents have children or grandchildren that have had to move out of the area because there isn't any work here. This might provide an opportunity for a few of them to stay.
There will be jobs here.
What kind of jobs though, John?
Well, in
I
the
mean,
presentation I
construction?
said that there will be a number of
I mean,
high-value
are they gonna be
electromechanical.
construction?
Can I answer one question at a time?
My question.
Let me just answer one
Sorry.
question at a time. I think, you know, I also come from the same windy rock as Patrick does. And, you know, I first came here in 1980, and I've lived abroad, but I've worked for an American base since that time, mostly with General Electric. You know, as far as JP Morgan are concerned, their stated purpose is to build a world-class wind company. To understand how JP Morgan works, they take ideas and they create large, successful indigenous companies out of those ideas. And what they did was to look around at where they could find the ability and the energy to create what they call a world-class wind energy business. And, you know, they bought my company. That's what they did. And their plan is to grow that company. We're not just doing a project in Ellenburg. In the same way as Zilka, our focus is in the northeast, but we are developing 7 projects. This is not a hit and run operation. And, you know, JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs are not in the business of doing that. They have records that demonstrate that. Now, the question about the jobs. I thought what I said was, we're in the process of developing a specific employment model for the individual projects. Because the JEDI model spits out a number, and people always say, well, how many real jobs locally is that? And I said when I was standing there, you know, I apologize for the fact that I don't have actual detail, but there are, you know, 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 high quality M&E jobs, and I mean high quality. These are the kinds of jobs that people crave if they're electromechanical.
Like what, for instance?
Operating and maintaining the turbines.
And then, right, qualified. What about the construction jobs? Who's
I
gonna
said there
be-
are 253 identified construction jobs.
And you said at the last meeting I went to that people put a resume in.
Yes.
And that's
When we're
it.
ready to go, we will look first. I also said that it's in our interest to invest this employment in the community so that they will stay here, they have wives here, their kids go to schools here. It is an intelligence test that we will look first into the community for these jobs. Go ahead.
Okay, which wind farm is giving you the information on the birds and the bats?
In the western part of the state.
Which one is it?
It's in Wyoming County.
Weathersfield.
Weathersfield, yes.
The Weathersfield one where you guys are doing a project right next to it, right? Okay, what happened to the project in Michigan this week? Did that ask
I really
Michigan?
don't want to discuss a Michigan project at this meeting.
It has a lot to do with it though.
No, it doesn't. I'd ask you for, you know, a little bit of, you know, leniency here. The Michigan project is not being discussed here.
Well, it has relevance.
How?
It's a project that you have gone forward with
Successfully,
till this week,
with great support and.
till this week.
You must know something we don't know.
Maybe I do, but it came to a halt.
Okay, well,
It's not
it actually,
news.
It actually
did not, you know, we're working on it 24/7.
Not today.
John, when you mentioned the payments to the town, county and school earlier,
Yes?
was that a pilot payment?
That is an actual example that if a pilot similar to another New York project was to be done, with the same economics, they are the numbers that would come out for the 55 unit project that is in the handout. If you read the handout, you'll see the whole thing is clear.
But you were saying, as you said, for that, there's 477,000,
That is the figure.
would that be for this town?
Can I address that?
I answered the question when I was on my feet. I said there are 3 people who participate in the benefits.
I
of
wrote it
compliance.
down, I'm just trying to compare it to what I
3
wrote.
people, county, the school district and the town.
Yes.
The town's take under the present plan is 34%, which would be $162,450 to the town. The rest of the money would go to the county and to the school district and would have an impact on people's taxes. Is there anybody from Ellenburg who wants to ask a question?
I'm from Ellenburg.
Yeah, okay, good, I'm
I
glad
was
you are. Yeah.
No further questions?
Yeah, I have questions. In regards to the work and jobs, basically what you're talking about is just minimal time jobs, with the exception of the more technical jobs to be long-term.
The model talks about full-time job equivalents. So it's 43 full-time job equivalents for a 100 megawatt plant. So that's 43 times 40 hours per week. How many of them are direct jobs is a question that we need to try and answer in a more meaningful way than just referring to the New York State's model. I know, because my own background, I did a lot of operations and maintenance in my own background. I know the quality of the O&M jobs. There are a lot of opportunities in the operations and maintenance side of this. A typical sort of partial job is, someone is going to be plowing roads here, like big plowing contracts to keep the roads open. There will be road maintenance contracts. There will be, civil engineering support jobs. There will be offices here in which people come to work. There already are offices in which people who are local come to work. How many of them will be full-time equivalent? I would hope that half of them are. Please don't write that in your newspaper, because we don't know until we get a specific number of turbines.
Well, it's just an idea, a realistic idea. The town is not gonna spring and come to life. It's just a little respite in the economy of the town.
Well, I think it's more than a respite.
I think it's a couple of things. First of all, as John pointed out, this is a predicted number that comes out of an economic development impacts model that was developed for the National Renewable Energy Lab under the Department of Energy. And it's an economic, jobs and economic development impacts, JEDI. And it predicts pretty accurately how many jobs would happen in a reference project. And you put into the model where the project will be located, what the pilot payments would be, and how big it would be, and some other inputs. And for a project of that size in upstate New York, it
No,
predicts...
it's 100 megawatts.
Yeah, of 100 megawatts. This is a 100 megawatt reference project. So it'll be slightly different for an 80 megawatt project. And as John said, we're developing the detail, a specific list of jobs. But it's important to remember that they fall in 3 categories. Direct jobs, people who report to work to the wind farm every day. Indirect jobs, which would be subcontractors who serve and support them. And what they call induced jobs, which are people that are in the community who have restaurants and gas stations and hotels and the rest of it, who support all of them. And these are full-time job equivalents. The number that would be local depends entirely on the local talent and skill base. As John said, we would seek to make as many direct hires as we can among qualified local people. But every town is different. Some towns have a lot of people who are already qualified to do those jobs, some towns don't. Those jobs are really statewide full-time job equivalents that would be developed for a north country wind energy project of that size. It's really largely up to Ellenburg and the surrounding community how many of those jobs become local. We would seek to find qualified applicants and train them. So it'll be a cooperative effort.
Patrick, how many people, or what's the construction company that's in Martinsburg right now? The one that's doing the work?
The one that's doing the roads, it's a company called Blattner.
Where are they based?
They're out of Avon, Minnesota. They're one of 3 companies in the US with experience in constructing wind farms. So I wish there was such a company in New York, but there isn't. Maybe there will be with all the activity going on.
How many people are you?
You asked about the roads. Their subcontractor is out of Gloversville, New York.
What?
Their subcontractor, their road, they're basically project managers and supervisors, but their road contractor is out of Gloversville.
And where is that company based out of?
It's based out of Gloversville, New York, which is, I guess, the other end of the park.
I'm making probably more comments than I should, but on this employment, right now, our best and brightest go somewhere else. We grow them, we pay to send them to college, and they have to go somewhere else to get the kind of job that they're qualified for. I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that some of these jobs, operating these, require engineers and people with skills. And we might be able to bring some of our own back home.
It's already happening actually on one of your neighbouring projects. Some people who were from the area have kind of written in and sent resumes and said, you know, I really would like to come back to my area. You know, and we met with them and we speak to them all the time, like, and they're, you know, pretty high on our list, to be honest.
If I could just add to that, in terms of local impacts, you know, we hear from more people every day who are cashing those environmental powered checks at the local bank, because we are circulating a lot of money even at this early stage of the local economy. But I had the pleasure yesterday in Plattsburgh of meeting at the Rotary Club, a woman from SUNY Plattsburgh, and she told me about the Costi Scholarship Program, which provides scholarships specifically in alternative energy studies. And those are some of the people that we would want to cooperate with and find talented people right down the road who are interested in going into this field.
I have a question. I want to make a comment. As you represent Noble and you represent Zilka, I represent some Ellenburg residents. Patrick, now you talked to the Martinsburg project. Is that the Tug Hill project? Okay. And I will say, yes, I know that there are local people hired for that project. There was a man that got hurt this week that's fighting for his life, but he was a local person. That's the most local employment that I've seen out of the 2 wind farm companies. And if you don't mind, Patrick, would you talk about the taxes again? You said that you're not taxable. That's correct.
Well, there is New York State Law 487. Is it 487? 487. Called the Wind and Solar Exemption. And so, what the law states is that taxing that renewable energy projects are exempt from taxation unless the taxing authority removes that exemption, which they can do.
Right, which Noble said that you were wrong, but okay. Thank you for clearing that up.
Excuse me,
Johnson, I'm sorry, Patrick, but we're gonna put $477,000 in the tax base.
I don't think we're speaking at cross purposes here. I think Patrick and John were both talking about paying tax equivalents through a payment in lieu of tax agreement.
Yeah, but
It's basically like paying taxes under a legally binding
Apologize to
contract.
Patrick for what he had to say, which is fine. I cleared it up with Patrick, thank you.
One more quick question. My degree was electrical engineering and ended up as a banker. My question to you, both of you gentlemen, we have a maximum on the transmission lines down here, am I correct? 600 or 300? 300?
Just over 300.
Just over 300. You're proposing 75 or give or take on the megawatts?
Megawatts, yeah.
Okay, and you,
We have applied to interconnect 123.
123, so neither one of you even with you together. you will not exceed it.
Yeah, and, you know, there are other projects, as Patrick said, there are other projects that have made applications, but the ISO is getting smart about this now, and, you know, you need to demonstrate you actually have a project, and the rules are maturing for, you know, figuring out which of these projects are going forward and which aren't. So, even though there seems to be rather a lot of projects in this queue, I think that, you know, I certainly have a view, and I think Patrick probably does as well, of how many of these projects ultimately will materialise.
If you're able to add capacity, am I correct? Still,
Yes.
even with both of you together, you're going
Yes.
to be able to add capacity.
Well, it is our belief, my belief, and it sounds like it's Noble's belief, that we can add capacity, that there is capacity on the line. However, there is a process. The impacts of a wind farm on the grid will be studied very, very carefully by the New York Independent System Operator in accordance with standards laid down by the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and other regional and state bodies. And so every project that wants to interconnect has to go through that very extensive process, which is probably at least a year. It is at least a year. We have sufficient confidence that there is capacity to allow us to connect, but I don't think we don't want to presuppose the outcome any more than we would want to presuppose the outcome of any other process that we went through.
But there would be a possibility in the future of adding capacity.
Yes, the way it's likely to work, you know, the ISO, you know, with you know, FERC, you know, pushing them along, set up a system of, you know, classes of projects. You go into a particular class, and then any system strengthening that's required, you know, to get all of that class onto the system, the cost of that is borne by everybody. And then if you're in the next class, because eventually what needs to happen, and you know this, is that the transmission system has to be strengthened, because, you know, this is not a discussion about our wind projects. The transmission system has to be strengthened. And, you know, as more and more power is injected into the existing system, you know, the ISO has to figure out like how to allocate the cost of strengthening, you know, double looping it, or, you know, putting in, you know, whatever it is that they have to do. So what people seek to do is to get into the queue, get into a particular class, and pay their share, you know, to be interconnected. And the study that Patrick is referring to, the interconnection sensitivity, these studies are hugely involved and are further complicated by the fact that wind is not a constant resource, it's intermittent. And that presents a whole slew of extra challenges to the system managers. They have determined, though, in several studies, they've been able to determine that up to 10% of a grid system, you know, the New York ISO system, up to 10% of it can be from an intermittent resource without, you know, any negative impacts on the management of that grid. So, you know, the 10% number kind of gels with the 25 for the overall state requirement when you take the hydro and the existing renewables. The technical constraint of the ISO kicks in at around the same time as you hit the 25%.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Sounds good to me.
We have a question.
Yeah, I have a question for you, John. When you're talking about the taxes that the town will receive for the Noble project, is that just Noble's towers, or is that all the towers that are being built in Ellenburg?
Just Noble's towers.
So Zilcar or any other company that builds towers will also
Yeah.
put money into that? So
Yeah.
that definitely would be much higher than we're talking.
If both projects go ahead, yes. You know, it's one plus the other.
Okay.
Question for either of you gentlemen, unless your answer is different. If in the future, in the coming years, the wind farms go defunct, what liability befalls the landowner or the town? Are they held to dismantle them or maintain them?
It's a very good question, and it's a question that town officials and landowners are rightly concerned about. We all have a pretty good idea of what is ahead of us. I mean, we can't say exactly what we'll be doing tomorrow or next year or in a couple of years' time. We have a pretty good idea of what's ahead of us in the next 5 or 10 years. We probably have a less good idea of what's ahead of us in 15 or 20 years. When we proceed to build a wind farm, we go through so many processes. If we were to build a wind farm here, it would cost us in excess of $100 million. And that $100 million actually ultimately has to come from individuals. And it comes through banks and funds and this and that. But ultimately, it's somebody's money. And so the people who are investing that money have a duty to the people who've given it to them to invest, to make sure that this is a good investment. Now, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you finance it, whether it's Michael Zilka or whether it's me investing my retirement funds into JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs and then investing it. Ultimately, it's your money, my money, your pension, your 401k, your savings. So the people who manage that money are responsible to make sure it's a good investment. And so whatever kind of investment it is, wind energy or Walmart or it will be subject to great scrutiny. This year, next year, we will have a very good case for wind energy. If you look at the cost of coal, it's doubled in the last couple of years. The cost of oil has more than doubled. The cost of natural gas has tripled. It's very clear that the cost of energy is going up, and it's probably not going to go down. And so, in the near future, 5 years, 10 years, we know that the technology is one of the big technologies is wind. After 15 or 20 years, who knows? We'll have a hybrid nuclear fission fusion super generator, or not. So I think for the first years, we can all be comfortable. Our investors, the town, the landowners can be fairly comfortable that that wind energy is a viable way to generate clean, renewable electricity. But we're not so sure about 15 years, and that's so typically what happens is we will make an agreement with the towns and the landowner. It could actually be either, whereby after a certain number of years, when you begin to get into that, that time frame when a new technology could come up or something could happen that can't be foreseen, that we would start contributing, and this would be a requirement, probably a requirement of any permit, that we start contributing every year, and typically it's after 10 years. We start contributing every year some money into an escrow account, so that as you go further and further in the future, the town or the landowners, the town probably has an escrow fund available to dismantle these machines. And so it's a good question, and it, of course, makes our economics a little bit less good because we put that money in the account, and even though it's not being used, we have to treat it as being spent, and so it, reduces our profitability. But I think it's the right thing to do. It's a very common request, and so I would anticipate. I can't imagine actually that we wouldn't have some form of a bond. We would actually have a number of road bond and a decommissioning escrow account, or whatever vehicle would be appropriate.
Yeah, broadly the same answer for Noel, although I always tell landowners who ask me this question, and they all have, every single one of them. I say, look, if we go, west, so you have a windmill, and if I don't pay you, no one can come onto your land, and someone's going to show up with a big checkbook like to relieve you of the problem of the windmill. But like Pat and Silka, we recognise that no town is going to issue a permit unless the matter is addressed. It has to be addressed.
This is providing that it's in good shape and it's functioning and all that, but if the windmill itself is in repair.
Okay, well,
there's lights that need, aviation lights on the thing that need to be going all the time.
That's the purpose of the operations and maintenance. We allow an amount of money per kilowatt produced. The industry has a very, very long record of how much it costs to properly operate and maintain a windmill plant. And that's what, when these guys get up in the morning and go to work, that's what they're doing.
Well, I'm saying this is after it's defunct, and your minds are elsewhere. And
the great thing about a windmill is that if it's working, it doesn't require fuel. So its cost of operation is the cost of keeping people there to, keep the light on.
Right, but I'm saying that it's all over with, and the landowner now has a windmill,
Well, that's
and
the
it's there, and
situation.
it doesn't work, and the light on top
That's
of
the
it goes
situation
out.
that Patrick is addressing. There has to be the funds available,
Right.
or a bond to cash in to take it away.
But I mean, it's really not, unless it's working, it's a problem.
Right.
One other question, am I given to understand that neither company right now has no designs on the APA in the park of doing anything? Such as, underground wires going through the park to get to your windmills?
Now, the projects that I talked about this evening has no designs on doing anything in the park, but we do
None
have
whatsoever?
we do have the hope that in the future, if this project is successful, that we would add a small park project. But the project I spoke about this evening, nothing in the park.
What about steel?
Patrick?
Yeah, as a wind energy company, we would like to put wind projects where it's windy and there's transmission and there's a separate community. I don't think we could go to the park agency and say, we could do a project outside the park and we could do a project inside the park. You know what we want to do? We want to do a project inside the park right now, and maybe later on we'll do one outside. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's just another level of complexity in doing a project in the park. And it's not, you all know that.
Right, I
So
can
what, so
understand
what,
that.
so what we would like to do is, and the project we're proposing has I showed you it's north of the park. The project we're proposing that we've applied for 120 megawatt interconnect does not have any turbines in the park. There is a project that is going through the process. It's entirely in the park. And I think there might be another project in the southern part of the.
What was that?
Well, it's the north. It's I think Councilman Danford referred to the north.
Oh, well,
That's
Yeah,
not
so-
going through.
There is a developer who's going through the process. But
in this area,
Yeah,
I
in this
should
area.
confined it to the
Yeah,
town
so-
of Ellenburg.
So our plan is to, we can't try and build a project in the park until we build the project outside the park.
Well-
What the agency will say is, well, what alternatives have you looked at? We have to be able to say, we've looked at the alternative outside the park, and hopefully we would be successful.
So
If we're not successful here, like for example, if the town of Ellenburg or any agency or whatever, some agency said, you can't build here. Actually, the reason might be nothing to do with environmental issues. It could be, I mean, one issue could be the wind isn't sufficient. And we're going through that process and we're measuring and studying. It's conceivable that we might not be able to build a project here, and we might go to the park and say, your park has been damaged by fossil fuel. Wind energy is clean renewables. That we or somebody else, any developer, just anybody, might say, if you want to reduce the damage to your park from fossil fuel, there should be more clean renewable energy generation, and maybe we can talk about having it in the park. And then we might say, we looked outside the park, but the wind wasn't good enough, and the wind is good enough, and this part of the park has open farmland, and people the resources are being used by humans for the benefit of the human species.
I understand.
So, but it wouldn't make sense. We have to demonstrate. We have to look outside the park first, and that's what our project here is.
So even to do what you propose to do, where part of the park, you might have to go through somebody's property that is in the park for your wires. Is that,
I mean,
is this a possibility?
Well, one option when you look, I mean, if you if you look at this map, in fact, if you look at this map and you look at the interconnection queue, there's a transmission line here and there's a transmission line here and there's a line, indefinite boundary. There's a line.
What is that boundary?
This is the blue, the indefinite boundary. So park inside, and people will argue where the park ends and
That's the blue line, right?
the blue line.
That's, there's no argument.
So there is right here a power line, an overhead power line going to
Which
the
is
park.
in the park.
It's in the park. So there is, if you look for the ingredients for a wind farm, transmission, wind, transmission, and a receptive community. You have here transmission. Now, this transmission line goes into Franklin County and exits the park. And I believe, John, there are a couple of projects that have applied to connect.
There are, I don't want to speak for another developer, but yes, there's another developer who has apparently some land in the park who has made a transmission interconnection, but it's not Noble, and to my almost certain knowledge, it's not Zelka. Pat's going to confirm that now, right?
It's not, no, we have not made an interconnection application, but there is this transmission line. Now, you might say one option is, I think what you were alluding to is, there's already a transmission line in the park. So that's already there. There are no wind turbines in the park, but you might say, well, somebody might say, oh, transmission line here, transmission line here, can we put turbines outside and connect to this line?
No.
And if you were to connect to that line, you'd have to go to the park. We're not planning that. We want to see if we can put a project outside the park. Let's see how the North Creek, not North Slope, North Creek project goes. Let's see how we do here. But there are, I believe, 2 projects that have applied to connect to this line, but they're outside the park. And if those projects get built, the capacity on this line will be gone. And so the issue here is probably a moot point, because the capacity on this line will be taken by wind projects where the wind turbines are outside the park and the interconnect to the lines outside the park. I mean, this is not us. We're not doing that. So I'm just.
But as of right now, with you, both you companies, there is nothing.
No, our application is to the line, the transmission line that runs just north of County Road 5.
One other question concerning the lines. Now, in your lines that you would run through people's properties, what do you do if you come across somebody who doesn't want it? You have this party is allowing it, and this party, then you got the guy in the middle.
You can't do something to somebody that they won't have you do. It's their land. Absolutely, you can't. There's no concept of eminent domain or any of that kind of thing here. Like, if somebody says, no, I don't want transmission lines on my land, well, you have to honour his personal decision not to have transmission lines.
I mean, just to comment. We're a private company. We're actually just like you folks. Get an idea and you say, well, let's see if others are interested. The first stop is the landowner. If the landowner, the person who owns the land, does not want to participate, maybe if the person who owns the land is over here and everybody over here wants to participate, you'll probably be okay. If the person who owns this land, or let's say the person who owns all this land on the other side of the transmission line doesn't want to participate, you probably don't have a project. And there are lots of places where you don't have projects. Lots of places. There are a few places where you have interested landowners, transmission and wind, and an environmental situation which can accommodate this. So there's nothing. If there was such a situation and that one person, or there were more than one person, we wouldn't have a project, and we probably, hopefully, would have gotten to that point before we get to this one.
Patrick? You said, I believe it was you said that there's 29, oh, Noble has 20, all right, Noble has 29 landowners. Is that public, no, are they public knowledge?
Yes, if you go to the Clinton County Records Office
Okay,
and check there, the recording of the easement lags behind it takes some time for them to put it through. It's public record.
and how many of the 29 are public record?
All of them will eventually be public. Now, if you take an easement on someone's land and you record it, it's a matter for public.
Can I ask another question? When you fellows came to town, and did what you did and whatever, why didn't you go to the town board and tell them what your plans were before you signed everybody up?
You kind of know what Patrick just said. He said that unless you have interested landowners, there's no point in wasting anyone's time.
But you should have presented yourselves to the town board firsthand and let the people know what you were doing.
Why?
Town board isn't our boss. Town board isn't our boss.
The land is privately
Well, just to make it
owned.
public so everyone could know.
Why?
Well, I found out too late, that's why.
Private land is private land.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want in your land, as long as you don't
Right, but
disrupt
the
somebody
thing, all
else.
right, okay. And now we're stuck with having to make laws and rules and regulations for how to manage these things. Yes, I do. I pay taxes, I live here and I vote here.
Are there any other questions?
Patrick, how many landowner contracts have you guys signed for this one project?
No, you know, I actually don't, I don't know the number offhand. It's,
Have a rough idea?
yeah, it's probably of the same number of landowners.
And do you have a recorded thing?
Yeah.
Okay, there's one figure that was given to me by one of your competitors, and I just wanted to see your thoughts on it. In order to take down a turbine in today's money, it costs $321,000. Is that the same figure you would estimate?
I've never heard that figure. It seems high to me. But I would say rather than, and I don't know whether the competitor was in this area or
It's New York.
in New York. It seems pretty high to me. It's you know, it's you all know it's very takes a lot of work to build something, whether it's a business, whether it's a house, whether it's a farm. It takes a lot of work to build a structure.
If you give
It
me
takes-
a rough, if you
it
give
takes
me a
very
rough
little work.
guess,
It-
I will present it as such.
To be honest with you, I don't know, but what I would suggest is that as part of this process, as we move forward, rather than me guessing or commenting on somebody else somewhere else, I think the way to do it would be for the town to say we'd like a decommissioning bond, we'd like to know how much it costs, and we'd like you, the developer, to commission a study and
I
tell us.
just thought it would be fair for the landowners to actually know that ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean,
It's not reasonable, right?
well, the other landowners here, and they go through their process, and I found, to be honest, I found the landowners here, the town officials here, to, obviously, we're here, we found that people have put a lot of energy and effort into investigating wind and investigating the downfalls. We don't know all the answers right now. That's the next part of the process would be to have a scoping session for what needs to be studied, and this is one of them, and it's a good point. I do want to say this is a great community. The first time I came here, drove up from Albany, came up on a Sunday, brought the children, long drive, parked the car, said we'd go out, I think it was on Tacey Road, go out for a walk and feel the wind. Within 2 minutes, somebody had passed by and stopped and asked if we needed help. So this is just a great community. And the landowners, very smart and very, very hospitable.
But they obviously don't know all these figures and.
Well, we don't know the figures. We don't know the figures, and the birds. And we can't tell you about the birds and the bats, I think it's fair for there to be a decommissioning bond, and I think it's fair for that amount to be what an engineering judgment said it should be.
What's the cost per tower to put up?
Well, to put up a tower is a six-figure. To actually put it up, to
Yeah,
take it
total
from
cost.
to take it from the ground and put it up is six-figure sum.
Is it
but the cost-
1.6 million I read.
I'm talking about to put up the tower
Yeah.
is a six-figure sum. To buy it, to a wind farm of this size, the wind farm of the size we're proposing is, let's say, $150 million plus.
Yeah.
And so we're proposing 75
You do
towers.
the math, right. And-
So it's somewhere between, probably close to 2 million, 1.5.
and all
It
the
depends on currencies.
And the power that's generated goes into the national grid,
It's goes into the national electricity grid.
and then nobody has any benefits of the electricity in this area unless they want to purchase it at a higher rate.
Actually,
According to
The-
NISAC.
well, the studies that John has referred to, they concluded that 3,000 megawatts of wind energy by 2013 would improve grid stability, reduce the risk of the fuel supply for electricity generation. The other thing that it would do is reduce wholesale electricity costs in New York State. 3,000 megawatts of wind energy would reduce wholesale electricity costs in New York State by more than $300 million.
But
Now, do I get the benefit of that? And you get the benefit of that? That is, we produce wholesale electricity. It is taken by NICEG, Niagara Mohawk, Consolidated Edison, Rochester Gas and Electric, and they transmit it through their power lines to your house and
at
my
a
house.
cost higher than what we pay
Well,
for.
the cost, your electricity supply is regulated, at least for the small people like you and I. It's regulated. The rates are set by the Public Service Commission. I'll say this much. If the wholesale cost goes up, you will see it. If it comes down, I don't know whether you'll see it or not. But it's not. There's nothing we can do. We would love, we're not a retail electricity supplier. We're not a utility. We cannot, by law, sell you electricity. And it's a very good question, and it's something that people, it's actually almost the first thing they want. This wind farm is here.
We don't get
Can we get the electricity? It doesn't matter whether it's a wind farm or it doesn't matter what kind of generation it is. That's the way the electricity industry has been developed and regulated. And
Because in our electric bill, NISAC, they gave a little pamphlet, and it states if you want to purchase the wind power, it's at a higher cost. And towns are purchasing it in different parts of the state, and they're paying quite a bit more for the purchase.
yeah, that's a voluntary. It's a voluntary market.
That's right,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's a voluntary market. If you have some spare money, and I buy energy from Green Mountain Energy in my house. I can't really not buy wind energy, so I pay $20 a month more.
That's all my point.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, it's a voluntary market.
Right.
I volunteer to do it. I don't have to do it. I volunteer to do it. The wind energy in New York comes from 3 existing projects, 3 small projects. So there's relatively little supply. When you have 3,000 megawatts, you will have much more supply, and one hope would be that somebody like Community Energy or Green Mountain, who are green energy retailers, would say to you, instead of you buying it at 10% premium, I'm going to sell it to you for 15. And if I'll sell it to you for 15 for 10 years, and if your rates go up from coal or gas, you will always pay 15. So the hope would be that such a product would be available, and at the wholesale level, such products are actually being traded right now. They're being created and traded. Whether it gets to you or not, that's like if you pay tax to the town and the county, will you see, if we pay higher taxes, will you see higher services or lower taxes? That's really up to your elected representatives.
Hi, Patrick, do you guys have a projection of what models of turbines that you would be hoping to use? Like I said, it's just projecting in this.
When you make an application to the grid, you need to specify a turbine type, and so we've specified a turbine type.
Which is,
Well, once you go through the process, I won't say you get locked in, but it's a bit of an issue to change it. If the turbine suppliers know you're locked in, your price is going to go up. And so, whereas for technical reasons we have provided the independent system operator with a
right,
turbine
well, that's
model.
what I'm asking. is
Yeah,
for
but
models that
if-
you'll be using.
If the turbine supplier that we have selected is watching this video, he will raise my price, and so I prefer not to say. But
It's not like there's that many, right?
we will make the decision when the time comes.
So.
We don't even know if that model will be available. So-
Right, I know you don't, because they change quite frequently. Would you say, are you using GE or Vespa?
That's exactly what he can't say out without ruining his competitive position. You know, respect his competitive
No,
position.
he said which models.
I prefer not to say.
I
And
mean, you
it's,
guys gave me that information.
Yes, yes we did. But,
All right, I won't
you
say
know,
which
we're in a different
ones.
position. in the
I won't say
competition
which
cycle.
ones, but would you guys
No, no,
say that you'll
what-
be using the same?
What the person watching the video is interested in is not the model, it's the make.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you guys, okay, I know what models that you project to use in the Brandon project. Are you projecting to use the same models in the Ellenburg project?
At this
That's
time,
not giving me any,
I'm in kind of the same position as Patrick as far as the Ellenburg project is concerned. But, you know, where we haven't made a determination, we've told you. And, you know, as soon as we can make that determination, but, you know, please respect
this
the need
project
for,
is
for,
really-
you know,
well, that's what I
competitive
said,
information.
I don't have to say it, I mean, I can, but I won't. That's just, I'm just asking if it's comparable.
John,
you know, sorry, I just, for our Flat Rock project, if you'd asked me that question at various stages, I'd have given you a number of different answers.
Okay, so which ones are you putting up in Tuck Hill?
We're putting up the Vestas V82.
Did we what?
The V82, Vestas
Two.
V82.
Okay, thank you.
John, and when we were at the other meeting in Cherubusco, and you talked about the lighting, and the FAAs for the lighting of this, and you said that it's gonna be like, you know, like through the perimeter of the whole project with the lights?
Yeah, the Federal Aviation Authority has issued a bulletin where they're saying that they henceforth will treat wind farms as a single obstruction rather than a series of individual obstructions. And, you know, you can find this information on FAA.gov.
I can't.
It's there. The impact of that would be that lights would be on the perimeter of the wind park. What they discovered was that if a pilot looks down and he sees a whole grid of lights, the obstruction is not as apparent. Now, there's a fellow's name, there's a very interesting guy you can talk to about this, and I will email you his name. It's the fellow that made the presentation. Go talk to him, because he actually studied two projects. One was a ridge project, and the other was, you know, had a different characteristic, like more spread out windmills. And they talked to the local people, they talked to the pilots, and they came up with this determination as best practice for turbine lighting. And the single obstruction means that, you know, where they are at the moment, there will be lights on the outside machines, and they will be at half-mile centres, which means kind of every second machine, something like that.
Like the 4,000 acres in Clinton that you were saying how they're gonna do the whole perimeter of that project?
It's treated as a single obstruction. Now, you know, when we come to do our lighting proposal, you know, the FAA will bless it. You know, and they say, well, you know, guess what, we think perhaps that the north end and the south end are actually two sides. They may have a view, which we would have to comply with, but they have said clearly that a wind park should be considered a single obstruction.
So therefore, if these structures are 265 foot with 125 foot blade at the peak,
The light is actually on the nacelle.
that's right, so when the blade is up, would you have to have like no air travel over that thing? Because they're only gonna see the nacelle light. They're not gonna see the other 125 feet.
Yeah, they don't fly that low. Yeah, they're going to use our wooden parts to navigate from. That's what they're going to use it for. They don't fly into it.
They're gonna use something to navigate.
They don't fly that low. That's the last
Well,
time I saw an airplane fly.
They do up here.
And there are setbacks from airports and so on. So the other interesting fact that the FAA came up with is they no longer think that these strobe lights have any value at all. They prefer the flashing red light, and they specify so many candelas and certain types of light, and it's red. It flashes slowly, but there'll be a discotheque on your land idea is just not correct. There won't be strobe lights in these machines.
So there'll be red lights blinking on top.
You asked me this question in Churubusco, it's the same answer.
But
It
is it,
wasn't past that.
I'm just asking you, because you told us in Churubusco, is the red light gonna be on the top and then the white lights on the perimeter?
There are no white
There are no
lights.
white
It's all
lights.
red?
Yeah. The red light, a single red light on the nacelle.
Yeah,
They talked about having two lights because they were afraid that the light might not be visible if for certain angles of approach. But they can the idea, and they've said a single red light on the top of the nacelle is what they want to do.
I thought you said there were gonna be lights along on the side of
No.
No,
at all?
There will
someone
be,
else said that.
there,
Someone who's not a wind developer.
No, that's what I thought I heard.
But it's not passed by the FAA yet. That's the projection.
I just wanted to echo what John said, which is simply because there seems to be some confusion, I don't know why. There will be one slowly flashing red light on perimeter turbines and at half-mile intervals within the project.
Okay, now I got the picture.
At the top, on the nacelle. Today, under current regulations, this is expected to be enacted by the end of this year. So this would apply to all the projects that you're hearing about. Today, there are two red lights and two flashing white strobe lights on every turbine. So the new FAA regulations would considerably cut down by about 90%, probably, the number of lights that are on the wind farm.
For those of us who aren't familiar with the terminology, what is the nacelle?
The nacelle is the body of the turbine that holds the gear and the generator, and the windmills attached to the front of it. It sits on the top.
And how much oil is in that?
100 gallons of lubricating oil.
And the nacelle, to put it in perspective, is the size of about a Greyhound bus. You guys have kind of compared it to?
Less than a Greyhound bar. It's,
We should put up dimensions.
A Hummer, the size of a Hummer?
I think the dimensions are on the website. The dimensions are certainly available.
I don't mind being scared.
They're available on the G website with the specs of the different towers. And John, to email her the information that you said, you can email it to me. Mark's had an two emails this week from me.
Can I have her email questions to you that you can answer for me?
Absolutely. Our email information is on the contact page there.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but
Judy
Judy
Baker.
Judy Baker, yes.
Yeah.
I see you at a lot of meetings.
Yeah, you will. You did, you will. Yeah. That's- You have to learn.
And I just,
Yeah,
the last question you asked me, I was wondering, and I now remember what I wanted to say. I certainly appreciate you folks coming. I know that there are people here who think that wind turbines are the greatest thing since sliced bread. There are people who would like to learn more. There are people with a public duty. And there are, I'm sure, people here who maybe are against or have serious concerns. And I certainly appreciate everybody participating in the process in a cordial and polite fashion. It certainly makes our lives easier, and I think it makes everyone else's lives easier. So there is a process laid out. It involves significant public participation, and certainly I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone's questions and the interest and the cordiality and the welcome. So
And
I'd
I'd
like
like
to
to
thank
say that I respect you for welcoming the information and the questions from both sides, because it's all education. I have not said anything that wasn't. Thank you.
Okay, and obviously Noel is grateful that you all take the time and trouble to do this. It's, unless we have an informed public, this thing won't work, like, we may as well give it up. So thank you all for taking the time.
And I, especially in the committee, thank you for coming out. And we will have another meeting in about a month, and come and see if I whistle the same. If I don't improve, there'll be another chairman.